Welcome to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher, where we take you behind the scenes with peak performers to learn what makes them tick and discover how you can apply their lessons to your life. I'm your host, Molly Fletcher. Today's guest is John Mackey, co-founder and CEO of Whole Foods. Today, we're going to delve right into the evolution of Whole Foods and John's personal leadership journey. Both, by the way, are fascinating. A college dropout and counterculture enthusiast in his early years, John opened his first health food store, Safer Way, in 1978, years before the organic foods movement was a thing. A few years later, he co-founded Whole Foods Market, and you might say the rest is history. The amazing thing is John has stayed on and led Whole Foods through 4 decades of growth and innovation, including his recent sale to Amazon. How did John evolve and how did he grow with the company? What were some of the greatest lessons he learned? John's latest book, Conscious Leadership, explores the vision and mindset behind his own leadership journey and provides a guidebook for values-based leadership that we can all learn from. Today's conversation will have you rethinking conventional business wisdom and reimagine how you lead. Let's jump right in. Here's my conversation with Whole Foods co-founder and CEO, John Mackey. Well, John, thanks for joining. It's an absolute treat to have you on. You know, I want to start with your personal story, right? How did you first get involved in the health food movement?
I get asked that question a lot. I never know quite when to start the story, but I'll start it. I'm at the University of Texas, probably about less than a mile from where I'm sitting right now, back in 1976. And I moved into this vegetarian co-op. I was not a vegetarian. I really didn't know anything about food at that time. But I was interested in all things counterculture. This was a time when the youth of America, the baby boomers were, and I'm kind of born in the middle of the boomers, was coming into, adulthood. And we were interested in alternative in almost every way. So the counterculture was very interesting to me. I moved into this co-op it was communal living situation, and it was vegetarian, and I did become a vegetarian at that time, and I had kind of a food awakening. I began to really care about natural and organic foods, and I started to feel better because I started to eat more healthily. I never ate, I was a junk food eater prior to that, and I never ate vegetables, and I slowly re-educated my palate to enjoy fruits, vegetables, beans, vegetarian type foods. And I became the food buyer for the co-op, and I got more and more interested in it. It's like there's so much depth to food that I had no idea. This whole universe opened up to me. And then I went to work at a small natural food store called Good Foods back in 1977. And I came home one day I liked working retail. I came home, and my girlfriend that I'd met at the co-op that was living there, Renee, came home and said, "What do you think if we opened up our own store?" And she got super excited about that. And so we were launched. We raised $45,000 in capital from friends and family, and we opened a small natural food store called Safer Way back in 1978. And we did that for a couple of years, didn't know much about business, didn't take any business classes in school. I studied the liberal arts, the humanities, but I was a quick learner, and I found business to be fascinating. I was a whole new universe for me to explore, so I began to read, and I read hundreds of business books. And slowly, I also had a good mentor with my dad, who had been an accounting professor at Rice University before getting into business himself. And he helped guide me, and we opened first Whole Foods Market. We relocated Safer Way, merged with another natural food store in 1980, and opened the first Whole Foods Market. And that was just, we hit the jackpot. That was an incredibly successful store. within 6 months, based on the information I could gain around the country, it was the highest volume natural food store in the United States. It was hugely successful. And then we opened a second store because we had a flood that wiped out that store 9 months after we opened it. And second store so we wouldn't be so vulnerable to another flood. And then we just, seriously, I mean, we just kept growing because it was fun and we were doing well, and it was an adventure. And I was young and full of changing the world kind of consciousness.
And what was that growth like? I mean, how did you talk me through a little bit how you scaled it?
It took a long time to scale. It's very interesting, and you just made me realize something that we should have said in the book. We have this chapter on thinking long term, and one of the things we talk about in that chapter is exponential growth, and how exponential growth usually starts small, but the compounding, if you continue to compound over long periods of time, it grows exponentially. It can become very large. I should have used Whole Foods as an example itself in that book, and I've never thought about it until right now. It would have been a good example because, I mean, we opened the first store in 1980, and the second store in 1982, and the third store in 1984, fourth store in 1985, and then the sixth store in 1986. So we were growing kind of slowly, about a store every year, a year and a half. You know, we have 515 stores, I think, right now. If we'd open one store a year, well, it'd take us another 500 years to get there, right?
Sure.
But what happens is that as we gain more experience and knowledge, as we learned how to open stores, and as we became more successful and had more capital available to us to retained earnings, and as we took venture capital money in, the ability to grow faster became really possible. And we took venture capital money in 1988. And that fueled our growth out of Texas. We'd gone to Houston and Dallas, and then we went to New Orleans, and we went to Palo Alto, California. And then right after that, we went to Berkeley and then Mill Valley. So Northern California was our first real breakaway from Texas. It was very exciting times. We were in California. We were succeeding in California. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yeah. This is where natural foods originated, at least the whole idea. So then we went public in 1992. We raised money. We raised $28 million in our IPO in 1992. The IPOs were very, very different in 1992 than they are in 2020. We didn't have a particularly high valuation. We didn't raise much money. But what we've had now is a currency. And we began companies that were like Whole Foods, maybe a little smaller, but their entrepreneurs have been doing for a decade or longer. They were eager to sell out to us because we could basically, they could monetize their years and years of labor. So we bought Bread and Circus in Boston, and Mrs. Gooch's in Los Angeles, and Unicorn Village and Bread of Life in Miami's Fort Lauderdale area, Fresh Fields in Washington, D.C. in the Mid-Atlantic states. And these served as sort of platforms for our growth because from there we had a critical mass of stores as well as the intellectual capital that was in the team members that were in those companies. And then that enabled us to grow simultaneously in several different geographical regions in the United States. And so we've been growing ever since, basically. Still are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am a frequent, by the way, Whole Foods person. My daughters are there actually right now. Tell me this, what are some of the biggest challenges? What were some of the biggest challenges early on?
Well, I think the biggest challenge, we had the flood in 1981, and we had 8 feet of water in the store. So that was a near-death experience. We almost didn't survive that one, right? But we did. And that's when I first kind of learned about the importance of stakeholders. But the challenges that any startup business is going to have, or any young company is going to have, generally, there's always going to be a capital challenge. Where do you get the money? You can't grow without capital. And it's a little bit different today because so many of the startup businesses are, they're digital businesses and you can scale digitally. I remember when I first realized that because these software companies like Microsoft, once they had their software developed, they could continuously upgrade it. And but the cost of selling another Windows system was just pennies, right? Because they were just copies.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Well, we take that for granted today, but that was such a revolutionary idea 35 years ago. Because before that, and it's still true today, to open physical stores like Whole Foods Market, every new store, that cost a lot of money. It wasn't pennies on the dollar. It was millions of dollars. It was expensive. So the challenge initially of capital was huge, and we were constantly borrowing money and you taking on debt, and then taking the venture capital money and eventually going public. But until we did the IPO, Whole Foods never had enough money. We always were up against it. And even a better example of this, one of the best books I ever read by any entrepreneur was Phil Knight's memoirs on Nike called Shoe Dog.
Yeah, great book.
And in reading that, I kind of it's like, if you have children, you kind of relive your childhood. Well, I was like, in reading his book, I was reliving Whole Foods Market's birth and growth. Except Phil, he was a lot more aggressive than I was. I mean, I thought I was aggressive because I took on all this debt and was hesitant to take venture capital money in or take, dilute the stock down with going public. But he held off until the very bitter end. He took massive risk with so much debt. And with the downturn, Nike would have failed. They would have gone bankrupt. So it's a great story. But that capital issue is a huge issue every business faces. And then the other big issue is, where do you get your talent from? Where do you get the intellectual capital you need to grow the business? It's one reason software engineers and technologists, that the companies like Google and Apple and Amazon, these guys are paid unbelievably high amounts of money because the good ones are so scarce. But it's true of all businesses. Really good, capable people. If you're trying to grow fast, you just can't get enough good people. In fact, one of the fascinating things to me about being part of Amazon now is how Amazon is able to hire so many talented people. I mean, they make an announcement, we're going to hire 100,000 people this year. It's like, okay, 100,000 people. That's bigger than, a small city.
Yeah. Right.
So anyway, that's a challenge. You got the capital's a challenge. The funny thing is every store we opened initially was pretty successful. So it's not, and it's still true today. Whole Foods has had very few stores that have not succeeded for us. So that wasn't the problem. It was the money, the people, and then also the challenge of just finding the right locations. Because you have to be patient. They're not just all out there waiting for you. You have to sometimes be patient for the right site to come along. I think those were the biggest limiting factors to our growth. Oh, I might as well say it because it's true. One of the bigger limiting factors was just me. I mean, my inexperience, when you're an entrepreneur, you're learning new things all the time, and I was a fast learner, but I also didn't have that much experience. So I made a lot of mistakes, and Whole Foods had to overcome the lack of experience of its co-founder CEO. And fortunately, although I probably tried a few times, I never really drove the Whole Foods bus off the cliff. But I did make a lot of mistakes. I think that is something that's underreported because most entrepreneurs don't want to report their mistakes. But that is a limiting factor for most startup growth. It's one of the reasons that venture capitalists frequently try to replace the entrepreneurial founder with just a professional manager who just had more experience.
Well, that's one of the things that's so interesting to me about you, John. I mean, you've led the company throughout its entire history and obviously scaled it and sold it into, it's a multi-billion-dollar Fortune 500 company, and you've led it. So you're humble, certainly, which is wonderful.
Molly, there's two kinds of entrepreneurs. There are the serial entrepreneurs who just love starting things up, and they're really good at it. And when it starts to build a bureaucracy and get bigger, they don't like it any longer, and they sell it off, and then they go do another one. I've got a number of friends who are serial entrepreneurs. They're building these companies to sell them. And just like somebody might build a house and then sell it. So these guys they're home builders. These guys are company builders. Okay, I'm not that way. There's another type of CEO who's the builder, who wants to build for the long term. And I mean, there are lots of good examples of that. I mean, Jeff Bezos is an example of that. I think Elon Musk is an example of that. Steve Jobs was clearly an example of that before he passed on. And so building a company is a little bit like, for an entrepreneur, a little bit like having children. And I just love my children. I just want my children to grow up and flourish and be happy and do anything I can to help them be happy. And I don't want to move on to the next relationship, so to speak. The metaphor, like all metaphors, has its limitations, but it also illustrates and points to a thing. I love building Whole Foods. It has been my life's work. You know, I'm getting older. There will come a time in the next few years when I will retire. But as I say, not today.
Well, you know, I want to, John, dig into your new book, Conscious Leadership, and really sort of your own leadership journey. And so maybe start here. Why the word conscious?
I like the word conscious because if you think about business, it's interesting. Even the name business, which is really comes from busyness. Business people generally work very hard. They have long to-do lists. There's so many things they have to do each day. So it's very externally focused. It's very task-oriented. And capitalism in general is very task-oriented. So for me, the word conscious refers to not the exteriors, but the interiors. The interiors are our inner beings, where the emotions are, where our spirituality lies, where our self-development is. And so conscious capitalism is capitalism, but it's done in a more conscious way with purpose, with higher purpose, with caring about stakeholders, with caring about the culture of your organization, and helping the leaders to be more conscious and helping them to learn and grow. So in the book Conscious Leadership is about, we know from Conscious Capitalism, which I see Conscious Leadership as a sequel to, we know from, and this is why we wrote Conscious Leadership, is because it's like, I got so many questions after Conscious Capitalism. Yeah, but how do you do it? How do you do it? How do you become a more conscious leader? And we have a couple chapters on it. We don't go into any depth there. So Conscious Leadership was the opportunity to go deeper. And when you read the book and you look at the chapters, the last chapter kind of catches it all: continuously learn and grow. But we have to learn and grow and love and then finding win-win-win solutions and integrity and thinking long term. These are all things that we have to practice. These are interior developmental parts of our being, and I might add interior parts of a larger corporate culture as well. You know, Malcolm Gladwell, I think, made it famous about you have to work to become a master. Anything, you have to work about 10,000 hours on it. If you want to play a musical instrument well, you just don't pick it up and start playing it. You have to practice it. If you want to be a professional athlete or be better at golf or whatever, you have to practice it. Well, if you want to be a better leader, you have to practice it.
Right, no question.
And that requires interior work. It's not, you just don't become a master leader, in just a small period of time. And I guess I'm more conscious of this fact because I've been doing it for 42 years. And I'm continuing to learn and grow. I'm more conscious today than I was 5 years ago. But I was more conscious 5 years ago than I was 10 years ago. And hopefully 5 years from today, I'll be a lot more conscious than I am today as I'm speaking with you. So there's this continuous learning and growing. And conscious means to be aware, to be more deeply aware of those things that lead you to help you grow.
Well, and it's interesting because you talk in the opening of the book, right? You open the book with a story of an attempted coup in 2000, and you call it Your Awakening to Conscious Leadership. Describe, if you would, for our listeners, describe what happened.
This was back in 1999 and 2000. This is back at the tail end of the first .com boom, where all of these, it's a very interesting part of history where this massive land rush was on, with everybody trying to scoop up these names like pets.com and drugstore.com and every sort of generic name so that people thought that would give them an advantage, that people would be able to remember that URL and do business with them. So it could be pretty much anything. And it was just this wild scramble, and capital flowed into these startups like crazy. People didn't even do what used to be called a business plan. They just had a PowerPoint deck, and they'd go talk to venture capitalists about the deck, and they'd get checks written to them for tens of millions of dollars. And they had these crazy valuations. And it was a mania. In Whole Foods, we believed the internet was fundamentally going to change everything, and we wanted to be on the cutting edge of it. So first we started WholeFoods.com, and then we decided we could, the big idea that we had, which I still think is a good idea, we were just ahead of our time on it, was the idea that there's a certain lifestyle for people who eat natural whole foods. And we wanted to sell more things to them than just the food. We wanted to sell them. We bought a vitamin company called Amrion, and we were going to sell, and they were a mail order company, and we thought this is perfect. This will fit really well into selling more supplements. These guys were masters at selling this way through the mail order catalog, transitioning to online. We set up what we called Whole Journeys, which was going to be about special kind of foodie vacations where you could go on a walking tour, and we'd take you to different wineries and cheese making operations, and it would be, we thought our customers would love that. So we created this whole business model around that. But then again, I mean, my wife and I moved to Boulder, Colorado, where that vitamin company Amrion was based. And I said, I'm going to get this thing up and going, and I'll come back. But for now, I'm going to focus on this. One of my leaders I designated to, I'm going to leave Whole Foods in your hands. I'll still be connected, but I'm not going to handle the day-to-day stuff. And after a year, the dot-com boom turned into dot-com bust. And Amazon's value, they were public at that time, it dropped 90%. And all of these dot-com companies went out of business. And we sold off, and the whole downward trend hit us as well. We sold off WholePeople.com, WholeFoods.com. We sold it off to Gaia, which is a public company, or it was at that time. And my wife and I decided we moved back to Austin, and I took back over the CEO position, thanked my executive friend for doing a good job in my absence. And but that also led to a coup attempt. And the coup was led partly by that executive and partly by two directors who didn't care for me much, I think would be fair to say. And there was a deep sense of betrayal. I almost did lose the job, but at the end of the day, the board stuck with me and didn't fire me. And that executive had to leave the company, and the two directors resigned from the board. But that was such a wake-up call for me, because I've been leading the company since 1978. Now it's just February 2000. So we're talking about, that's a 22-year period. And that was 20 years ago now. So almost 21 years. And I just learned so many lessons from it. The first thing I realized was, gee, how could I underestimated the board of directors. That I had recruited all those directors, right? I mean,
sure.
When you're really the founder, you're doing everything, and there's no board when you start out. There's no board of directors. You create a board. You recruit a board, but they also represent the shareholders, and they have power over you. So I changed my attitude towards the board after that. It was like, wow, these people can fire me. It's obvious in retrospect, but it never really had focused on that I was maybe at risk for that. So I began to develop much better relationships with the board going forward. I also realized, gee, I can have executives that could potentially, that want my job. And I want to make sure from this point onward that I work a lot closer with my executives, that we build up a higher trust relationship, and that I help them learn and grow and develop themselves. So that nothing like that will ever happen again. Because I was caught by surprise. That executive had worked for the company 16 years. I considered him a good friend. And so I felt a deep sense of betrayal. The good news there is we did make up. It took several years, but we repaired that relationship.
Good. Awesome.
I wouldn't say we're buddies.
Yeah.
He lives in another city. but we're on good terms. We put it behind us. But the main thing, Molly, the main thing that came out of that was I just realized if I want to stay the CEO of Whole Foods and grow it, I've got to take my game to a higher level. I've got to be a better leader. I've got to be more awake, more conscious, more caring, better communicator, more patient, better listener, because I got a lot of feedback from the board about all my faults. And they kept me, but they told me all the things they didn't like about me too. So I just became very determined to be a better, more conscious leader. And that just sort of launched me on this path. And in some ways that I was on it before, but I became more conscious that I wanted to be a conscious leader.
All right, everybody, in just a minute, we'll get back to my conversation with John Mackey. This episode has been all about how we can be more intentional, more conscious in our leadership. And that's one of the reasons why I started my coaching program, Game Changer Leadership Huddles. We all need a little reimagining right now. And so if you are ready to reimagine, if you are ready to take your next step on your leadership journey, join our monthly coaching community today. Our next huddle is October 28th on building resilience. Does anybody need a little bit of that right now? Join today at mollyfletcher.com/leadership-huddles. Again, that's mollyfletcher.com/leadership-huddles. Check it out. I'll see you in the huddle. You know, one of the things I love that you talk about, John, you talk about purpose as like a living thing, right? And the job of a leader, and you sort of talk about, is to connect people to purpose. I am a huge fan of this mindset. I think this matters so much. What are some of the tangible ways that you do this, at Whole Foods?
Here's the thing. The most important thing you can do is embody the purpose yourself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because one of the things, I used to struggle against this in the early days at Whole Foods because I didn't want my whole being to be like, I'm not Whole Foods, I'm me, I'm an individual, I'm not Whole Foods. And it took me really many, many years before I realized that whether I like it or not, I'm part of the brand of Whole Foods Market. I cannot escape that responsibility. And there'll always be that attachment, even after I'm gone. There'll still be that remnant that's still there. And because you cannot escape that, you have to fully embrace it. And that means you have to embody the purpose yourself. There's no reason, if you're the leader and you don't embody the purpose, nobody's going to believe it.
Mm-hmm, sure.
It's like, you can't tell people, don't do as I do, but do as I say. People pay attention to how you show up in the world, not what you say. The best way to communicate purpose is to be that purpose yourself. I mean, to fully, if I was a junk food eater and smoked cigarettes and, spat and didn't live the Whole Foods lifestyle, I mean, what kind of credibility would I have in the purpose? I wouldn't have any at all. It would be hypocrisy. So that's it. You cannot be hypocritical. You have to embody the purpose. So that's the most important thing. If you get that right, the rest of it matters much. That being said, there are other important things if you really want to communicate purpose. At Whole Foods, it's more obvious to me because we're growing and every year we add thousands of new team members on, and they don't know the purpose. And so you have to, if you don't continually talk about the purpose and tie the things the business is doing back to the purpose, then they just forget about it. You can't just take the purpose and stick it on the wall and, frame it up and say, here's our purpose, and think, as I said, you have to make it living. And the living purpose is something that you are living yourself and you're communicating all the time. I very frequently, when I make larger communications to the company, I talk about our higher purpose, which is to nourish people on the planet. I talk about our core values, to sell the highest quality natural and organic foods, the importance of team member happiness and growth, satisfying, delighting our customers, creating value for all the other stakeholders. And if you talk about these things all the time and then you show how the strategies of the business tie back to the purpose and the core values, people get it. And you know what? I've also learned, Molly, people need purpose. People want purpose. They want to feel like their work is making a difference in the world. That we use this very famous, might even be apocryphal, but it doesn't matter. Such a good story of Kennedy touring NASA, and he runs into a janitor someplace along the tour, and he says, "Well, what do you do here?" And the janitor says, "I'm helping put a man on the moon."
Awesome.
That's purpose.
No question.
And if everybody that works for there is aligned to the higher purpose, then the organization is going to be unstoppable.
Amen. You know, what I love, you talk about the word love throughout the book. In fact, one of the 9 ingredients to conscious leadership is to lead with love. Why should we stop, right, being so scared to use love when it comes to business, right? And we come to leadership. I mean, so often, right, people in business hear that word and think, whoa, I don't know about that. I'm not sure I should lead with love. Talk about that a little bit, how that shows up for you, why that was one of the 9 ingredients that you chose and how you lean into it every day, certainly, obviously, in your own life and in Whole Foods.
I don't know of anything more important in life than love. Mm-hmm. I'm fully convinced that when we get to the end of our lives, we're not going to be thinking, gosh, I wish I worked a little harder. I wish I'd made a little more money. But I think we'll get to the end of our lives, and the life well lived is a life with a lot of love in it. A lot of love for our families, for our friends, for people of all types and kinds. The more love we have in our life, the richer our life is going to be. And in my own opinion, that's the purpose and meaning of life, is love. So, assuming that's true, and I will assume for the purpose of the discussion that it is true, why isn't love more widely seen in our corporations, in our businesses? There's good reasons why it's not there. I say it's locked up in the corporate closets. And that's primarily because of the way people think about business and the way they think about corporations. And the metaphors that we use to think about business, with almost without exception, are hyper-competitive metaphors. From war metaphors of we're going to crush the enemy, let's go to the war room, let's figure out our campaign to beat the enemies, to Darwinian metaphors of survival of the fittest. It's kill or be killed. It's jungle out there. Only the paranoid survive. To sports metaphors where let's huddle up. Let's go for a touchdown pass here. Let's hit this home run. This is a home run. This is going to be a slam dunk. We use sports metaphors, and the problem with sports metaphors, it's always win-lose. And any sport, somebody wins, somebody else loses. There's no win-win in sports for the most part. And as a result, we tend to think of business as hyper-competitive. And if you're at war, or you're struggling for your very survival, or you think it's essential that, winning isn't the most important thing, winning is the only thing. As long as that's how we think about business, then love is seen as sort of weakness. Love is something that, if you're at war, love is something you do after the war, or you after the game is over, you can go back to your families and your friends and hang out and be very lovey-dovey. But by God, we're here to win. We're here to crush the enemy. Love is locked up. It's not there. It's seen as something that will harm the organization from winning the war. And so it's not fully embraced. Now, we're not talking about, obviously, romantic love or sexual love. We're talking about that deep bonding that occurs from people. When they share purpose, when you're working with people, I mean, sometimes your team, you're working 40 hours, sometimes more a week, and doing it 50, sometimes more, 50 weeks a year, or 2,000 hours a year or more. To leave a big part of who you are as a human being and leave it out so you can't do that any longer, that's a terrible thing. We need to bring the whole human being into the workplace. And my experience at Whole Foods has been, when you unleash love in the workplace, it creates deeper commitment. Because I think the two things people most want in the workplace, Molly, the first one is purpose. They want to know that their work is making a difference. And the second thing is, they want to know somebody cares about them.
Mm-hmm. Somebody loves them.
Yeah, that somebody loves them. Nobody wants to work for a bureaucracy that doesn't care about them. But if you give them purpose and love, then they'll give you their loyalty back and their creativity and their hard work. Whole Foods has very low turnover. People work for us for decades. and decades. I don't know how many times I've had people start out working when they're 20 years old, thinking this is a part-time job they're going to do for the summer. And 15 or 20 years later, they say, well, I just took this as a part-time job, but I just love working here, and I built a career around it.
That says so much.
Yeah, so love really matters. Love is not weak. Love is strong. Love is what holds the organization together. And if you feel unloved and unappreciated, why would you want to work there? My God, you're spending a huge part of your life in a place nobody cares about you. Forget it.
Well, and gosh, I mean, imagine obviously the impact that has on the team itself with one another, not just top down, bottom up, but beside one another. That level of love means there's tremendous support, which is awesome. It was interesting, John, until I read your book, I didn't really know the full context or even really the story behind the merger with Amazon and sort of what preceded it, right? Can you share that a little bit with our listeners?
Back in 2017, in fact, the previous book that I wrote prior to this one was called The Whole Foods Diet. And the day that I launched that book tour, and not coincidentally, was the day that Jana Partners launched basically a shareholder activist attempt to take over our business. And after I met with those guys, they made it very clear they wanted to replace our board of directors, replace the management team, and put the company up for sale to the highest bidder. And that they were going around, they owned 8.8% of the business, and they had a PowerPoint presentation that pretty much just trashed Whole Foods and took a lot of things out of context and just made us look like we were doing a terrible job. And we had to figure out what we were going to do. And I kept asking the question, which is the fourth chapter in our book, what is the win-win-win solution here? What's the win-win solution here? So one win-win solution that we thought about was just fighting Jana and just fighting them. And they're trying to take over our company. Okay, we're going to fight you. We're not going to let you take over the company. But ultimately, the shareholders in a public company will decide that. And we knew from past, seeing what Jana had done in the past with other corporations, that we were in for a long, difficult fight if we decided to go that way. It was going to be expensive and highly distracting. And it was going to get dirty. They were going to say horrible things about our company in the media and make all these crazy accusations. It was going to be that's when a war metaphor is more appropriate, because they were going to go to war against us, and we were going to have to defend ourselves. The second thing is that we looked for friendly acquirer, somebody that would leave the company intact. And of course, Warren Buffett is famous for buying businesses and helping them get better, but largely leaving them alone. So we contacted him, and he wasn't interested. So nothing went that way. We did talk to one supermarket company, Albertsons, which expressed interest in maybe merging or acquiring Whole Foods. They weren't public at that time, so we were attractive to them because that would mean they would then once again be public, selling shares to the public. So we looked at that, but we didn't think there was a good chemistry fit between the two companies. And the other one was possibly going private, just taking the company and going back to be privately owned. To do that, we'd have to have taken a massive amount of debt on that, probably over $10 billion in debt, maybe more. And that would have put the whole company's risk. If the economy took a downturn like we did in 2009, 8, and 9, that we would have gone bankrupt. And so that was highly risky. So we didn't know what to do. What was the win-win-win solution? And we couldn't figure it out. And we thought about it. Time went by. And then one morning, some of the best ideas come in my life and probably for other people.
Sure.
Because right when I woke up and it just flashed in my brain. The first thing I thought of when I woke up was Amazon. What about Amazon? And then I started to think it through, and I thought this could really be a win-win-win solution. I'd met Jeff Bezos a year before at a Microsoft event, and I really connected with him. We talked for a while. I really liked him. I'd always admired Amazon. And so we got in touch with Amazon to see if they wanted to talk, and they did. And then I flew to Seattle with 3 senior executives at Whole Foods, and we met with Jeff and 3 of his senior executives. This was on a Sunday. It was very kind of top secret, and they didn't give us the location until that morning when we were leaving. And we met, and we had an amazing conversation that went on about 3 hours, where we just explored what we could do together. If we were together, what could we do? and we had just really good chemistry. And I used a metaphor of like falling in love, because you fall in love, at some point you have the conversation where you stay up all night and you realize, I'm really clicking with this person. I really like this person. We're like synced up. Well, that's how we felt after we met with Amazon that day. We retreated to a restaurant to process what we just experienced. And it was like, those guys are incredible. They're so smart. They're so authentic and genuine. These would be great people for us to work with. And then it was, do you think they liked us too? And it turned out that they did like us, because we heard from them almost immediately after that. And just 4 days after that first meeting, they sent about a dozen people to Austin to follow up on the conversation. And then we were deep into the process. And 6 weeks after that very first meeting, we'd signed an agreement to merge, to be acquired. And a few months after that, the government approved it, and the deal was done. But it's been a win-win-win deal, and I tell a story in the win-win-win chapter, because the win-win-win is such a very important idea. And win-win-win is you win, I win, and we all win. The larger community wins too. So people know win-win. The third win is that it's got to be good for truly be a win-win-win. It can't be just good for you and me. It's got to be good for the larger community, however we might define that. So this one was a win-win-win for every one of Whole Foods stakeholders. It was a win for our customers. We had 3 major price reductions, and we're working on a 4th one right now. It was great for our team members. Not only did they not, if Jana had succeeded, probably thousands of our team members would have lost their jobs. And Amazon not only didn't lay anybody off, they increased our pay. They went up to $15 an hour for the lowest paid, and we increased, not that only a few people were making less than $15 an hour, but if you raise the bottom, you got to raise the middle, and you got to work your way up. So about 90,000 people got raises. Cost a huge amount of money, but Amazon was thinking long term. This is going to really help the merger do better and help the morale of the company. So it was a really good thing for the team members. Our benefits didn't change. Amazon did not force us to be like Amazon. They protected our culture. Everybody was worried our culture changed, but it didn't, because Amazon hasn't tried to change it. So it was good for our suppliers. Not only did we not have to stop doing business with our suppliers, but many of those suppliers through Whole Foods, began to get onto the Amazon website and their commerce platforms, and so it increased their sales tremendously in many cases. Good for our investors, because from the time that we first talked to Jana to the time when we announced the Amazon merger to when we closed the deal, the investors made $4 billion more than they would have made if that deal hadn't been. So great deal for the investors, and good for our communities, because of the tax dollars that have come in from that Whole Foods has paid, that continues to pay, from the philanthropy. We have 3 foundations. We give to thousands of nonprofit organizations a year. Amazon has not tried to change any of that. So and in fact, Amazon's been very supportive of our foundations, and in some cases has contributed money out of their own pockets to help our foundations to be more successful. So every stakeholder won in the deal, and that was not been true of any of the other alternatives.
And that's probably how you look at things now, right, John? I mean, and I'm hearing you say, I mean, that's how we all can look at things, is what's a win-win-win? Win-win-win, right? All the way around.
It's so very important. I mean, first of all, stakeholder theory has been misunderstood because it's being put into a win-lose framework. And you can't understand it. A win-lose framework, it's like, well, at last we're going to redistribute the money from the investors to these other stakeholders. No, that's not what a win-win-win framework is. A win-win framework is that all the stakeholders are winning, including the investors. It's not a win-lose framework. But think about our society now. If you think win-win-win, it's almost a complete ethical system for relating to the world. If every situation you find yourself, you ask, what's the win-win-win here? How can we all win? Doesn't our country desperately need this right now? I mean, we're struggling. We have different political fights going on, and the country's very divided. we need our leaders to be more conscious. We need more conscious leaders in business, but we also need them in politics and government and healthcare and education and military and every aspect. We need more conscious leaders who are trying to lead with love and who are also seeking the higher ground of win-win-win solutions. Just think how our nation would transform itself if we started to think win-win-win. I mean, we would get out of this horrible impasse that we're finding ourselves right now and begin to move forward in dynamic ways where all Americans are advancing and we could do it if we start thinking that way. But you have to change your thinking, and that's not easy because we're stuck in this win-lose framework, which people are reluctant to let go of.
Yeah, but stories like what you just described help us see, and I've heard you talk about it in other podcasts and other conversations, help you see the way through with this triple win mindset plus, right? It's awesome. John, I want to honor your time. Let me ask you one more question. What's been the hardest thing that you've ever had to do as a leader? I mean, you've done some hard things, and tell me a little bit about what's been the hardest thing you've had to do, and what did you learn from it?
The hardest thing I ever had to do as a leader was fire my father.
Wow.
My dad was my mentor. I had no business experience, really. I mean, if you look at my resume, it's boy camp counselor, busboy, waiter, dishwasher, good food company clerk, and then CEO of Whole Foods Market. I just didn't have any experience. I was very young. So my dad was my mentor. He'd been a college professor in accounting at Rice University in Houston, where I grew up. And then he'd gone into business and become a very successful CEO in his own right. And he just took me under his wing. And from the ages of about 24 to 40, I never made a big decision that I didn't have my dad's blessing on. I checked everything out working with him. However, in 1994, the company had gone public in 1992, and we were starting to grow more rapidly. And my dad he'd made a lot of money in his investment in Whole Foods. And he's older, and he was very much more conservative. He wanted us to go a lot slower and more carefully, and because he didn't want to lose what he had. And so we were starting to fight a lot. So I remember I agonized over this decision, but I realized, you know what, John, it's time. You got to push Dad on. You've got to move him out because he's really holding back Whole Foods' potential now. And that was really, really hard, scary, because I knew I was going to hurt him. And then I was, codependent on him. I'd leaned on him for so long. Could I run the company without my dad there by my side, checking everything out? And I remember the discussion. It was very, very difficult and very painful. And it's going to sound kind of funny, but I said, Dad, I am 40 years old. I'm 40 years old now. The apprenticeship is over. I'm ready to do this by myself. And he said, 40? You don't know anything. I didn't know anything when I was 40. Why do you think you know anything when you're 40? I was thinking 40 was pretty old. But my dad let me know right away that 40-year-olds don't know too much. And I said, here's the thing. Dad, I want you to sell half your stock. I want you to get off the board. I want you to sell half your stock because you'll get all the financial security you need the rest of your life if you sell that 50% of the stock. Take the other 50% and just hold on to it because we're going to grow the company a lot. It's going to be worth a lot more. And it was very difficult. He was very hurt. He asked me not to do it. And I said, I'm going to do it. You've got to let go. And I pushed him out. And the stock, it worked great. I mean, the company took off and we grew a lot faster and his stock became a lot more valuable that he hadn't sold. And we repaired our relationship after just really less than a year. We were really close again. But it was the hardest thing I ever did. I fired my own father. I fired my mentor. And you got to understand, I got married in 1991. My father was my best man at the wedding.
Wow.
We were extremely close. He was my best friend in many ways. So that's the hardest thing I ever had to do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, but it sounds like you navigated it.
But you know what, Molly? There's a moral in the story. And the moral of the story is we all need mentors. We all need coaches. But there comes a time when you have to outgrow your coach and your mentor and move on. Mm-hmm. And we have to do that. We need that help. And then there comes a time when we have to truly lead on our own and take responsibility ourselves. That's my big takeaway lesson. And I was ready at age 40 to do it.
Yeah. And you were clear on that. It sounds like. I mean, you were really clear.
I was clear.
which is huge. Yeah.
I probably was ready 3 years before then, but I just didn't. I hadn't worked up the courage to do it yet.
Well, I bet it took some time, man. That was a big, tough conversation. But so, John, we end with rapid fire. I'm going to hit you with some questions, and you just fire off what comes up. All right. Morning person or a night owl?
Morning.
Introvert or extrovert?
Mixed. More introverted, but mixed.
Okay. A book you recommend most often for leaders?
The book I recommend most often right now, and I've been recommending for a while, is Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now. Most important book written in the 21st century so far.
Enlightenment Now?
Yep.
Awesome.
Must read.
Awesome. One thing you wish you knew earlier in your career?
I wish I'd known the importance of being a more conscious leader earlier.
What's your favorite item at Whole Foods?
My favorite food is beans. Okay. I love beans.
Okay.
I eat beans every day.
What any other items that are your favorites?
Fruits and vegetables. I also eat a ton of fruits and vegetables every day. Awesome. I mean, I think those are the healthiest foods.
Yeah. What does success mean to you?
Success means fulfilling your higher purpose, whatever that might be in life.
Mm-hmm. So the show's called Game Changers. So one last question. Who's a game changer, or what game changer inspires you and why?
There have been so many game changers who have inspired me, and it's entrepreneurs that have inspired me the most.
Okay.
The Steve Jobs, the Bill Gates, the Jeff Bezoses, the Reed Hastings, the Elon Musk, the Phil Knights, people that create businesses and grow them. They have a huge impact on the world, and they've inspired me for many, many years. And in my own way, I've tried to have a positive impact on the world during my lifetime.
Well, and you know what's cool, John? I bet if we asked them that question, they might weave your name into the mix, man.
Well, I doubt that. That'd be very flattering if anybody said that. I'd be honored.
Hey, I can't recommend your book enough. It's an amazing read. And thanks for the way you live your life and what you do and the impact you've made on so many lives and certainly on so many communities. You're awesome, John. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Molly. You're pretty awesome yourself. You take care, okay?
That was fun. John definitely has me reimagining the way I show up as a leader. Here are a few of my favorite takeaways from our conversation. Number one, never stop learning. I love this. Never stop learning. If there's one thing that's clear about John's leadership journey, it's this: be a lifelong learner. Number two, make purpose something that's living. Live it yourself, communicate it all the time, and thread that purpose through all of your work. And number three, real leaders lead with love. As John puts it, love has been locked in the corporate closet. Love creates a deeper commitment. Let your people know that you care. Good stuff. Thanks, as always, for listening to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. There you can listen to previous episodes and leave us a review, which helps other people find out about the show. For more about me, visit mollyfletcher.com. Until next time, stay curious and be bold.